today's complex infrastructure projects, competing priorities are everywhere. What does project first mentality mean to you, and how would you put that into practice with your teams?
So this mindset needs to be, we're going to do what it takes to get this job done. And not only are we going to solve problems, ideally, we're going to prevent problems. To do that, you really truly need to understand the full program. As a contractor, a lot of contractors understand construction, the construction project.
Competing priorities can sink a project long before the first shovel hits the ground. What if the real challenge isn't just building, it's keeping teams aligned when everyone has different goals? In this episode, I'm joined by Eric Meisgeier, project manager at Stacy and Witbeck, to explore how the project-first mentality helps teams cut through complexity and stay on track. We'll also discuss how progressive delivery methods like design build and CMGC improve performance, why balancing project outcomes with community impact is critical, and what it takes to keep diverse stakeholders moving in the same direction. If you're a project manager, engineer, or leader seeking strategies to build trust, strengthen collaboration, and deliver better results, this conversation is for you. Before we jump in, I want to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, where emerging and experienced leaders can learn about real-world strategies to drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. I'd also like to recognize one of our sponsors for the event, Talent Matters. Talent Matters helps you gain a competitive edge through your people. They understand that an organization rises or falls based on the effectiveness of its leaders and people. Their sole focus is to help you select, develop, and retain high performers. When selecting people, Talent Matters ensures your interviews reveal the right behaviors to support strong hiring decisions. When developing leaders, their skill-based model and process unlock hesitancy and empower leaders to manage them with boldness, compassion, and skill. This is your performance advantage. To chat directly with their team, visit talentmatters.net. I'm your host, Fiona Johan, and this is the AEC Project Management Podcast. Let's jump right in. Now it's time for our PM Conversation of the Week with Eric Meisgeier. Eric, welcome to the Engineering Project Management Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Fiona.
We're very excited to have you. I want to start with a question we like to ask everybody is, can you start by sharing your career path and what led you to your current role as a project manager at Stacy and Witbeck?
Sure. Yeah, I started out in the industry, during summers when I was in college. I actually worked as a laborer. Which really, from a foundation standpoint, was great. It's great experience to be out there in the field. I understand what it takes to be there and build stuff, and really I have a tremendous respect for the men and the women in the trades because it's hard work. So, it helps me with that appreciation. So after college, I graduated and went to work for a company that did both marine and industrial work. Started out as a field engineer, worked my way up to superintendent, then a project manager. Also spent a lot of time in estimating with that company. Next, spent a little bit of time with a bridge builder as a PM. And then about 20 years ago, came to work for Stacy and Witbeck. I've been a design build manager, a project manager for the company. Also spent a lot of time in estimating and helping out the proposal group. Through this time frame, I've been in 5 states, worked with, dozens of owners, both on the private side and also a lot of public works. I've done, traditional low bid jobs, design build, CMGC, progressive design build, and, several emergency projects. So I've been very fortunate to have the opportunities that I've gotten. It's really given me, really broad set of experiences to draw from in managing projects.
You mentioned a broad set of experiences to draw from. Could you take that and tell me about, like, in today's complex infrastructure projects, competing priorities are everywhere. What does project first mentality mean to you, and how would you put that into practice with your teams?
Yeah, so, I mean, project first, the title kinda nails it, right? I mean, you need to, as a team, put the project first, and that may mean in the short term, you take your individual or your firm's, goals, set them aside, and do what's most important for the project. I would argue, though, in the long term, you're gonna be in a much better position to accomplish your firm and individual goals if you're working together as a team. So I think that's really just a short term thing. So this mindset needs to be, we're going to do what it takes to get this job done. And not only are we going to solve problems, ideally we're going to prevent problems. To do that, you really truly need to understand the full program. As a contractor, a lot of contractors understand construction, the construction project, but they might not understand, the full program needs of the client. So sometimes you need to, maybe do a little bit more than the contract requires, and that doesn't have to cost a bunch of money. That may be as simple as assisting them in roles that a contractor typically doesn't, have a hand in. An example of what we do is, it's an acronym, RUPID. RUPID stands for right of way, utilities, permits, interagency agreements, and design. On a previous project, let's take right of way. Right of way acquisition's not in our scope. However, it has a significant, or can have a significant impact on our schedule and sequence of work. So we set up a task force, with senior level people, co-leads, one on the contractor side, one on the client side, really to kind of dig into that. We needed to understand the client's process and how long it takes, what the different timeframes are from say, a property that they're going to come to resolution on versus one they're not. We needed to understand what properties, they generally have an idea of who they're gonna kind of deal with versus, go to condemnation. So from a risk analysis standpoint, if we know a property's likely gonna take longer to acquire, we need to sequence our schedule accordingly. But all this takes, this is a prevention of a problem. All this takes involvement by us involved in what is not typically our role. Now, we can also communicate to the owner, hey, we really need this property. We need you to start going after this one first. This is critical to our schedule, and we need you to put resources into this one, and you may need to fast track this parcel. So that's an example of, both, the whole team looking at the project from a program perspective and putting the project first, moving it, forward.
Yeah, I hear you saying the project first mentality gets your projects going, but you still, within that whole description, talked about, reaching out to others, managing your stakeholders. You can't abandon the people you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, that's another potential project issue, right? If you have stakeholders who are upset, or talking to their elected officials, that's potentially going to cause a delay. I'd also argue, we're guests. So, we need to treat the community as we are a guest in their house, because we are. And that's the right thing to do. And really, a lot of that is communication, understanding the community. We do that through a couple different avenues. One would be, attending community events, right? Usually the owner does outreach events. And so, something that not all contractors do. We would attend those events, listen, oftentimes co-present. We also like to have a senior person, boots on the ground, who is a point of contact for, the adjacent stakeholders. And really, that opens up communication, that opens up the ability for a stakeholder to have somebody to talk to. And at the end of the day, communicating what we're going to do and when we're going to do it is really important. I think people generally are better off when they know what to expect. Big part of that, though, is if you say you're going to do something at a certain time, you need to do it. Otherwise, you lose credibility. So, I mean, that's huge. That those points of contacts, I think, are a big part of that. And also listening to their needs, right? I mean, maybe we had a plan to build a driveway, one part. Well, come to find out, this property owner only has one egress, And so now maybe we have to build it in halves. And oh, by the way, he's, getting deliveries on Tuesday. So that would be a really bad day to even do it in halves. So maybe we push the work to Wednesday, and it takes a little bit of time and effort to understand that, but I think the payoffs are huge, and I think people appreciate it. I think people appreciate being listened to, and I think they will rally behind the project and be in favor of the project versus fighting the project. So and ultimately, if you got people that are happy with construction projects, there'll be more construction projects down the line. If you're negatively impacting businesses and people, the community is not going to want to build anything else.
In the AEC industry, skilled project managers are the backbone of success. EMI's AEC PM certification offers tailored training, ongoing support, and exclusive access to premium content that keeps your team sharp and effective. From foundational training to advanced leadership tools, set your team apart with certified growth. Learn more at aecpm.com. That's aecpm.com.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point. You're mentioning, these large transit and transportation projects are directly affecting those communities, and you mentioned a community first perspective in there. How do you balance that then with the project first approach? Where's the balance in those two?
Well, I think they are balanced. I think, they're just, the community is just another stakeholder. It's no different than, having to get a permit or finished design. It's an interface point that you have to manage, and it can help you if you get the community behind you. If the community is fighting you, that's really going to be an impediment to getting the project done.
Yeah. And as you're balancing, you mentioned the community is one of your stakeholders. You've got owners, designers, contractors. What strategies have you found to be the most effective in building collaboration and maintaining alignment across such a diverse group?
Yeah, so this is a really important question. You really have to have the right mindset, and to get your team into the right mindset, you have to build a culture. And there's a lot of little things you can do. For example, words matter. Don't call the owner, call the owner the client. Everybody should be calling the contractor by the name of, if it's XYZ contractor, not the contractor, right? And then that kind of humanizes the interaction. I think a lot of this is getting out of the, develop a plan, submit it, somebody reviews it, kicks it back, comment, right? Once you humanize the experience, I think people are more willing to work together and kind of create that collaborative environment, and as people are working together, I think you develop relationships, and I think you develop trust, credibility, all those things that really kind of pay off big dividends. We have a saying that no one is authorized to have an unproductive conversation, because it takes a moment to destroy all that trust you built over the years. So just, impressing on people, you gotta listen, you gotta check your ego at the door. We're all in this together, and it's not about placing blame on somebody. It's about solving the problem. Now, there's another kind of concept there. You're better off, or at least I believe you're better off, to separate the technical discussion from the financial implications. I think people can, from a technical perspective, be aligned on what the best solution is. The financial discussion usually is about, responsibility. So I think you have to have that separated. And I think even the financial discussions have to be, the right people, so it doesn't, get personal and hurt the team. So, and really the whole goal is to get everybody working together, solving problems. Like I said, getting away from that review, submit review mentality. And an example on a previous job is something we called the critical path meeting. We were in pre-construction trying to push the project forward. We set up this meeting to kind of knock down all the obstacles to getting started. It was so successful that we ended up continuing it through construction to keep things moving. But really, it was 100% focused on the schedule and what are impediments to starting work or getting work done. And the concept was, everybody that's a stakeholder that is involved in this decision or this issue is going to be in a room. And it needs to be people who are empowered to make decisions, right there and then. So everybody would get in the room. There would, you go through, okay, well, there's this problem, or, what are we going to do to prevent this? And then, we'd have an owner rep, a designer rep, any stakeholders that are affected, maybe there's a permit you have to get, and you talk through what everybody needs to move the project forward, and come up with a solution that, best fit everybody's needs, and as that team was successful, they started to take pride in not letting something impact the project. So I think it's something that has like this cascading effect where, if it's working correctly, it just continues to gain steam.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier that I'd love to hear more about, separating the technical from the financial discussions. How do you set that up for success?
Yeah, so I mean we basically have meetings that are purely financial discussions. And so if you're in a technical discussion, you can just say that's going to be handled in this other meeting. What we want this team to focus on is what is the best solution regardless of who's paying the bill, right? I mean, at the end of the day, likely the best solution is the same no matter who is paying the bill. Once people start thinking about who's paying, they start hedging. So pulling those apart, and a lot of times technical people appreciate that because that's what they love to do. And you take that
It gives them some freedom in that conversation, right? If you're not tied down by the finances.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that particular the financial problem can be booted to a different team, and then everybody can just move on. But it also, again, technical people love to solve problems. You get technical people from either side working together. Now you've developed this team that's just it's really good.
So you've talked about, getting your teams in alignment, getting them to use their best, their best traits and skill sets. You've got progressive delivery methods like design build and CMGC have played a big role in your career. What advantages have you seen that these approaches bring to project performance and risk management?
So I mean, at the end of the day, you're developing these relationships. You're doing this through the pre-con period. I think the pre-con period is extremely important. You end up discussing project requirements, and you have everybody has a much better understanding of the project and say the contractor and the owner, what the needs are. In a traditional bid build, you get contract drawings and specs and general conditions and all that. But there's a lot that's not conveyed through those documents that's not clear. So you have a much better understanding. It really helps everybody plan the work better. And again, you're solving problems and working together as a team. Once you hit construction, when in the heat of the battle, it's a lot harder to develop those relationships than up front. So I think alternative procurement really provides this opportunity for the teams to gel before you get into the heat of the battle. The whole idea, though, is once you get there, it's more efficient, and you're fighting the project and not fighting each other. I mean, even a lot of the bigger jobs have 2 to 3 year pre-construction periods. Even the simple act of going through negotiations and comparing costs opens up everybody's eyes to how the other team member views the project. So I think all these are good things. It's all about creating alignment, and expectations and understanding one another. There's just so much that's not conveyed in a written document that you kind of get through, living something together, if you will.
I think that's great. I'm a huge advocate as a project manager to always be talking through our plans so that everybody's as informed as they can be, so that when they have to make a decision, they don't just have their point of view on it. And it's really what I'm hearing there is that you can incorporate everyone's point of view because you've had those conversations and you've aligned
Yep.
with each other's goals to have one final project. So those are like the positives. What do you think one of the biggest PM pitfalls is that you've identified, and how would you recommend overcoming it or avoiding it for other project managers out there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, everything's about building a team, and you've got human beings and they're not robots. I see people develop an org chart or positions, and then, they tried to take people and jam them into a box. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have a staffing plan. Don't get me wrong, but you're going to have to tweak or change your plan based on the individuals. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see is that, a project manager kind of takes that mindset. I'm the boss. You're going to do it my way. Here's your role. Do it. You really need to take your team and develop the roles based on people's strengths and weaknesses, not necessarily on what your preconceived notion of X is. And again, that kind of leads into, what is your style? Or are you going to come out and say, we're going to do it my way or the highway? That whole mentality to me is a mistake. You need to solicit opinions. You can't be in love with, whatever your decisions are. Having said that though, you need to get input, solicit advice, but at some point you got to make a decision, and a timely decision is extremely important.
So you touched on this a little bit, but I wonder beyond, we're talking about technical delivery. You've been active in mentoring and developing future transportation professionals. How do you integrate that commitment into your leadership style and projects? You said you're not my way or the highway, but what would you say your leadership style is?
So I think developing people is, I think that is leadership. That's a cornerstone of leadership, if you will. And this is not I stole this from Phil Jackson from a book. But, he preaches develop a philosophy, not a playbook. So to me, you create a culture and a philosophy, you communicate it to your team members, you empower them to make decisions in real time. And I just think people feel better. They get more enjoyment out of their job and, don't feel like, they're under your thumb. So I think creating that culture where people are empowered is extremely important to growing people's careers. I think it allows people to be themselves and to flourish, and really, accentuate their positives, and then of course everybody's got weaknesses. So you got to work to shore those up either by shifting roles or providing training. Mistakes happen. You just, as a leader, you got to make sure that people don't make the big mistake. You got to help them prevent the big mistake. And, when they make mistakes, you gotta tell them it's okay. You say, hey, it's okay. I expect you to make mistakes. I just don't make the huge ones.
I'd rather you make $1,000 mistake today than a $10,000 mistake next week because you didn't mention it.
Yeah. And that's actually a really important thing is you got to create this culture where people can, so they're not afraid. They're not afraid to ask a question. They're not afraid to raise their hand and say, hey, I might have made a mistake. What do you think? Or I'm not sure I'm going down the right path. So I think all that's really important. Another, concept that I have is I feel like I'm at the point in my career where I need to train people to train people. I can develop or train, say, 5 people, and that's a pretty limited footprint. But if I can train 5 people to train people while I'm also kind of mentoring them, that's a much bigger footprint, and I'll have a much bigger influence on the team that way. So you got to kind of just grow that ability to mentor and train people.
Yeah, I really like that. I recently saw a quote, and I can't remember where, but it said that you're not really a leader until you've led other people to leading. So I feel like that exponential growth is really important because, like you said, we can only reach so many people. So we need those people to reach out further. And
that's a great quote. I'm going to have to use that.
Right? I wish I should probably Google it and find the source, but I saw it and it really stuck with me. And on that, what's one final piece of advice you'd give to leaders and project managers who want to build trust and consistently deliver successful projects? So we touched on some of it, I think, is, you want to encourage them to reach out to you when they made a mistake, or ideally even when they're like, I think we're about to make a mistake. And you don't want people scared to come bring that to you. What else do you think gives them that? How do you build that trust?
Well, I think by listening and, and having some empathy, right? And understanding people and seeking to understand where they are. I think, that's how you really reach people, and you really, people feel empowered when you do that. and they really kind of take on challenges and they don't go under their shell. I mean, and the other part is you really need to be honest and transparent. People know when you're not telling the truth. They know when you're hiding things. So, there's a saying I have that, I mean, this applies to owner client relations, with individuals. Bad news does not get better with time. So you're better off to just, be honest and transparent and, if it's bad news,
Own
say it.
it.
I mean, it's not going to get better. So,
Rip the Band-Aid off. Let's figure out.
yep.
I'm always telling my team, I'm like, it's fine if we have bad news. We can fix it now together. But if we let it fester, then it's a bigger problem to fix. So let's fix hopefully, a 10% of what could be 100% issue today, and sit in that discomfort for a very short period of time and find a solution versus sitting in the discomfort quietly by yourself for a while.
Yeah. And I've another one of my mentors said, you got to eat your frog first thing in the morning. Like, I mean, it's so, it's just getting something off, your back and getting it out there for everybody to work on. It makes your day, way better. You got this thing that's just weighing you down. It's better off just to, like you say, rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah. And as leaders, I think we're so positioned to, like, if you put that forth as the example, like, hey, here's what I messed up yesterday. How are we going to fix it? Then you created that culture. Yeah, obviously we don't want to make mistakes, but if we do, we want to bring our team in. Like, how can we fix it? What can we do? You're creating a culture where other people are going to feel comfortable saying, oh, here's the problem I'm foreseeing, or here's what happened. So that's all awesome stuff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. Awesome. Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at aecpmpodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your engineering project management endeavors.